I'm sharing my story because I need people to know what can happen when you trust the wrong person, even your own family. What I'm about to tell you changed my life forever, and I hope by hearing it, you'll be more careful than I was. Think twice before you trust anyone with your future, even your own children. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who will hurt you the most. Here's what happened to me. I was standing in my own workshop doorway when I heard the words that changed everything. Dad, you can't use the workshop anymore. Gary's converting it into his home office. I froze right there with my toolbox still in my hand, looking at my daughter Patricia standing in front of me with her arms crossed and that cold look I'd never seen before. My name is Arthur Pierce, I'm 62 years old, and I'd just been banned from the workshop I built with my own hands. The workshop that took up the entire back section of this house, a 20 by 24 foot space with pegboard walls lined with tools I'd collected over 30 years. Handsaws, power drills, levels, squares, hammers of every size, socket sets arranged in perfect order. The workbench I'd built myself ran along the entire back wall, solid oak with a vise that could hold anything. Above it, fluorescent lights that lit up every corner so I could see my work clearly. In the corner sat my table saw, the crown jewel of my collection, a Delta contractor's saw I'd bought used 15 years ago and rebuilt from the ground up. This wasn't just some hobby space. This was where I'd spent 30 years perfecting my craft as a construction foreman, where I'd taught Patricia how to use a cordless drill when she was 8 years old, standing on a milk crate so she could reach the workbench, where I'd planned to spend my retirement building cabinets for the neighbors, fixing things around the house, maybe teaching some of the local kids how to work with their hands. But apparently that was over now. I'd stocked that house with my money just months earlier. I'd given Patricia and her husband Gary $75,000 from selling my construction business, Pierce & Sons Construction, even though there never was a son. Just me, working my way up from a laborer with a high school education to running my own crew, managing projects worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. 30 years of getting up at 5 a.m., coming home covered in sawdust and drywall compound, saving every penny I could. But Patty, we agreed the workshop would be mine when I moved in, I said, still holding that toolbox like it meant something. The weight of it felt familiar in my hands. My father's old metal toolbox, the one he'd carried to construction sites back in the 1960s. Well, things changed, Dad. Gary needs a proper office space, and that workshop is just taking up room. You've got all those loud tools in there anyway. Loud tools. Like the gentle hum of my scroll saw was bothering anyone. Like the occasional use of my circular saw was some kind of neighborhood disturbance. I'd soundproofed that space myself, adding extra insulation to the walls so I could work without bothering anyone. Gary appeared from behind her, tall and smug in his pressed white shirt and dark blue tie, looking at me like I was some kind of handyman he'd hired and was now dismissing. Sorry, Art, but I need somewhere quiet to work. Business calls, you know? Important meetings with clients. Maybe you can set up something in the garage. The garage. A cramped space barely big enough for one car, with a concrete floor that stayed cold and damp all winter. No proper lighting, no ventilation, nowhere to mount my pegboard system. He was talking about moving $20,000 worth of professional tools into a space that wasn't fit for storing lawn equipment. This was the man my daughter chose to marry. Gary Stevens, 38 years old, a sales manager at some insurance company who wore suits to work and had never held a hammer in his life. Never built anything, never fixed anything, probably called a repairman when a light bulb burned out. And now he was pushing me out of the space I'd helped pay for. I put $75,000 into this house, I said quietly, feeling the words hang in the air between us. We had an agreement that I'd have my workshop space. Patricia's face hardened, and for a moment I saw something in her expression that reminded me of her mother. But not the good parts, the stubborn streak that Martha had when she was angry about something. That money was a gift, Dad. You wanted to help us, remember? No one forced you to sell your business. A gift. After I'd sold Pierce & Sons Construction, the company I'd built from nothing over 25 years. Started with just me and a pickup truck, taking on small jobs, deck repairs, bathroom renovations, kitchen cabinets. Worked my way up to managing crews of 8 guys, handling whole house renovations, commercial build-outs. Built a reputation in 3 counties for quality work and fair dealing. All of it sold to help them with the down payment on this house. This 2,200 square foot colonial with 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, and that beautiful workshop space that had sold me on the place from the moment I saw it. Of course, honey, I said, because something inside me snapped right then. Not a loud snap like a board breaking, but the quiet kind when you're checking a foundation and discover a crack that's been hidden under fresh paint. I understand completely. I put my toolbox down on the workbench, ran my hand along the smooth oak surface one more time, and walked out of my workshop. Behind me, I could hear them already discussing paint colors for Gary's new office, probably some boring beige or corporate gray. As I climbed the stairs to my room on the second floor, I passed the living room where Gary was already measuring the doorway between the workshop and the main house, talking about installing French doors to make his office look more professional. In my mind, I was calculating what those French doors would cost, what kind of trim work would be needed, how the installation would affect the structural integrity of that wall. Old habits, my bedroom was on the front of the house, overlooking the street. A simple space with just a bed dresser, and the one chair I'd brought from my old house, Martha's reading chair, a blue recliner, where she'd spent countless evenings with her mystery novels. It was the only piece of furniture Patricia had let me keep when I moved in. Everything else had to go because it didn't match the decor. That night, I sat on Martha's chair, staring out at the street, thinking about how I'd gotten here. 8 years ago, when my wife died of cancer, Patricia had been so supportive. She'd driven 3 hours from the city every weekend during Martha's final months, helped coordinate with the hospice nurses, held her mother's hand during the worst of the chemotherapy sessions. After the funeral, she visited every week for months, bringing groceries, helping me sort through Martha's things, telling me I'd never be alone. Martha had been the steady one in our marriage. While I was out on job sites dealing with difficult contractors and weather delays, she managed our finances, handled the business bookkeeping, made sure we had something set aside for retirement. She was the one who insisted I take that night school course in business management back in 1995. Arthur, she'd said, you're smart enough to run your own company, but you need to learn the paperwork side. She was right, as usual. The last thing Martha said to me 3 days before she passed was about Patricia. We were in the hospital room, machines beeping quietly around us, and she squeezed my hand with what little strength she had left. Take care of our girl, Arthur. She's going to need you more than she knows. I promised I would. Never thought that promise would lead me here. 2 years ago, when Patricia and Gary were looking to buy a house, she'd called me on a Sunday afternoon with such excitement in her voice. They'd found the perfect place, she said, but they needed help with the down payment. The house was big enough for all of us to live together comfortably. I could have my workshop, never be lonely again, and we'd be a real family. Dad, it's everything we've ever wanted, she'd said. There's this amazing workshop space that's perfect for you. You could set up all your tools, work on projects, maybe even take on some side jobs if you get bored with retirement. And we'd be together. Mom would have loved that. She knew exactly how to get to me. Martha had always worried about me being alone after she was gone, had made me promise I wouldn't become one of those widowers who just sits in an empty house watching TV until they die. So I believed Patricia sold everything I'd worked for and gave her the money. The house was beautiful, a well-built colonial on a quiet street with mature oak trees lining the sidewalk. Good bones, as we say in construction. The workshop space had been a major selling point. The previous owner was a cabinet maker who'd set it up with proper electrical, good lighting, and enough space for serious projects. The first few months after I moved in were actually pleasant. Patricia still treated me like her father, included me in conversations about the house, asked my opinion on things. Gary was polite enough, though I could tell he thought my stories about construction work were boring, but there were small signs I should have noticed, like how they'd rearranged the workshop without asking me first. Moved my table saw to a different corner because Gary said it looked better there, even though the new position blocked access to the electrical outlet I used for my sanders. Or how Patricia started referring to our house when talking to friends, never mentioning that I'd helped buy it. The real change started about 6 months ago. Gary got some kind of promotion at work, started making more money, and suddenly they were talking about upgrades all the time. New kitchen cabinets, hardwood floors throughout the main level, maybe adding a deck off the back. All expensive projects that would require taking on debt. That's when they started asking me to sign papers. Bank renewals, they called them. Refinancing paperwork. Just routine stuff, Dad. You don't need to read through all that legal jargon. And like an idiot, I signed them all. Trusted my own daughter. But I'm not completely naive. 30 years in construction teaches you things about contracts and paperwork. You learn to read the fine print because contractors will try to slip extra charges past you if you're not careful. You learn to document everything because memory isn't good enough when thousands of dollars are at stake. Most importantly, you learn to pay attention when people's stories don't add up. The morning after they banned me from the workshop, I decided to do some investigating of my own. Started with the locked desk in the living room where Patricia kept all the house documents. A simple lock, the kind you find on cheap file cabinets. Nothing that would stop someone who'd spent decades working with tools inside. I found papers that made my stomach drop. The house deed with only Patricia and Gary's names on it, no mention of Arthur Pierce anywhere. Transfer documents showing my $75,000 as a gift contribution with no ownership rights attached. loan modifications I'd supposedly agreed to, and worst of all, papers I'd apparently signed waiving any claim to the property. But here's the thing about working in construction for 30 years. You handle a lot of paperwork, change orders, contracts, inspection reports. You get familiar with your own signature, with how your handwriting looks when you're signing important documents versus when you're just scribbling a quick note. Some of these signatures looked wrong, the pressure was different, the angle slightly off, like someone had been practicing. I photographed everything with my phone, put the papers back exactly where I found them, and spent the rest of the day thinking. That evening at dinner, I watched them differently. Noticed how they exchanged glances when I mentioned wanting to organize my tool collection. Saw how Gary smirked when Patricia talked about my generous contribution to the house fund. The next week, Patricia left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went upstairs to shower. I'd seen her enter the passcode dozens of times, minus A24, her wedding date. What I found in her text messages destroyed whatever was left of my trust in her. There was a conversation with her friend Jennifer from work, almost done getting Dad off the deed completely. Howard says one more document and we can sell this place and upgrade to something in a better neighborhood. Another exchange with Gary. LOL, Dad's so easy to fool. He signs whatever I put in front of him without even reading it. One more signature and we're free to do whatever we want. And the one that hurt the most, a message to someone named Ashley. I know it sounds harsh, but Dad's getting older and we can't be responsible for him forever. The nursing homes aren't that bad these days. And once we sell this house, we'll have enough equity to get something really nice in the suburbs. Nursing homes. They were planning to stick me in a nursing home after stealing my money and selling the house I'd helped buy. I took screenshots of everything, deleted the message history so she wouldn't know I'd seen them, and put the phone back exactly where she'd left it. That night, I lay in Martha's chair staring at the ceiling, but I wasn't devastated anymore. I was angry. The kind of cold, calculating anger that comes from 40 years of dealing with contractors who try to shortchange you on materials, suppliers who deliver substandard lumber and hope you won't notice, and building inspectors who need to be handled just right to keep a project moving. If my daughter wanted to play games with paperwork and legal documents, she was about to learn that her old man hadn't spent 3 decades managing construction projects without learning how to fight smart. I started with a lawyer the next morning, found Carl Rodriguez through my old foreman Tommy, who'd used him when his ex-wife tried to claim half his contracting business in their divorce. Carl's office was in a strip mall between a tax preparation service and a dry cleaner. But Tommy said he was good people and knew construction law. Carl was about my age, maybe a few years younger, with gray hair and work boots under his desk. The kind of lawyer who understood blue-collar problems. I explained the whole situation, showed him the documents I'd photographed, and the text messages proving their intent to defraud me. Mr. Pierce, he said after reviewing everything, what they've done is textbook elder fraud. We can definitely fight this, but I need to be straight with you about the process. How long and how much, I asked. In construction, you always want the timeline and the bottom line up front. 6 to 8 months minimum if we can avoid trial. Could be longer if they fight hard. My fee is $200 an hour, but for a case like this, I'd estimate around $6,000 total. If we settle, maybe $10,000 if it goes to court. $6,000 was a significant chunk of my retirement savings, but I had some money set aside from the business sale. More importantly, I had something else they didn't know about. I had skills. See, when you've spent 30 years managing construction sites, you learn things that apply to more than just building houses. You learn how to document everything systematically. How to set up surveillance to catch workers who are stealing materials or cutting corners when they think you're not watching. How to gather evidence methodically, like building a foundation, one solid piece at a time until you have something that won't fall down under pressure. Most importantly, you learn patience. You learn to wait for the right moment to make your move, just like you wait for concrete to cure properly before you remove the forms. I started small. Digital recorder from Radio Shack, about the size of a cigarette pack, hidden behind some books on the living room shelf. Another one in the kitchen, taped under the lip of the counter where no one would think to look. Nothing illegal. These were common areas in a house I'd helped buy, and I wasn't recording private conversations in bedrooms or bathrooms. Within a week, I had them talking freely when they thought I was upstairs napping or out running errands. Gary complaining about how much my prescription medications were costing on their health insurance. Patricia laughing about how she'd convinced me to sign another waiver without reading it. Both of them discussing which real estate agent would get them the best price when they sold the house. But I needed more than recordings. I needed documentation that would hold up in court. That's when I put my construction network to work. My old electrical contractor, Pete Morrison, owed me a favor from when I'd helped him get a big commercial job 5 years back. Pete had expanded into security systems after the construction market slowed down in 2008. He came over one Saturday when Patricia and Gary were out shopping, told them I was having him check the electrical panel for safety issues. What he actually did was install 2 tiny cameras in the living room and kitchen, hidden in smoke detectors he replaced with newer models. Professional-grade equipment, motion-activated with wireless transmission to a receiver I kept in my bedroom. Everything legal since it was monitoring common areas of my own residence. Within 2 weeks, I had video of Gary using my computer to research estate lawyers. Video of Patricia forging my signature on practice sheets trying to get the angle just right. Most damaging of all, video of both of them counting out cash and discussing how they'd split the profit from selling the house. We should get at least $320,000 for this place, Gary said, sorting through a stack of hundreds. After paying off the mortgage and Dad's imaginary share, we'll clear about $180,000, enough for a down payment on something really nice. Dad's imaginary share? Like my $75,000 had been play money. Meanwhile, Carl was working the legal angle, filed requests for all property records, got certified copies of every document filed with the county clerk, and had a handwriting expert examine the signatures on the papers I'd supposedly signed. Good news and bad news, he told me during one of our weekly meetings. Bad news is that some of your signatures are authentic. Good news is that the most important ones, the documents waiving your property rights, those signatures are forgeries. Not very good ones either. The handwriting expert was a retired FBI examiner named Dorothy Williams who'd testified in hundreds of fraud cases. She could prove in court that someone had practiced my signature and forged the critical documents. Combined with the recordings and video evidence, we had enough to prove conspiracy to commit fraud. But Carl warned me about something else. Your daughter's going to fight this hard, Arthur. She's got her own lawyer now, and he's not cheap. Howard Martinez, he handles a lot of estate disputes for wealthy families. She's probably paying him $400 an hour. That meant Patricia was serious about this. Serious enough to spend real money trying to keep what she'd stolen. It also meant I needed to be smarter about my strategy. I started playing dumb. When Patricia asked me to sign more paperwork, I'd act confused, ask lots of questions, make her explain every detail. What I was really doing was getting her to lie on camera, recording her false explanations about what the documents said. It's just another bank form, Dad. Something about updating your address for their records. What it actually was, a power of attorney document giving her complete control over my finances. I signed it anyway right there on camera after she'd explained what it really wasn't. Perfect evidence for court. Meanwhile, I used my construction contacts to dig deeper into their financial situation. My old banker, Sarah Chen, had moved to a different bank but still had friends at the branch where Patricia and Gary kept their accounts. Nothing illegal, just professional curiosity about how much debt they were carrying. Turns out they were leveraged to the hilt. Credit cards maxed out, car payments on 2 expensive vehicles, and they'd already spent money they didn't have based on the assumption they'd be selling the house soon. They needed my money and they needed me gone, or they were going to be in serious financial trouble. That's when I realized this wasn't just greed, it was desperation, and desperate people make mistakes. 6 months after I'd started gathering evidence, Carl called with news. Arthur, we're ready to file. I've got enough evidence to prove fraud, forgery, and conspiracy, but I want to give you one more chance to think about this. Once we file these papers, there's no going back. Your relationship with your daughter will be over permanently. I thought about Martha, about her last words asking me to take care of our girl, but Patricia wasn't that girl anymore. She'd become someone I didn't recognize, someone who could look her own father in the eye and lie without hesitation. File the papers, Carl. It's time my daughter learned that her old man isn't as stupid as she thinks. Carl filed the lawsuit on a Wednesday morning in late September. By Friday afternoon, Patricia and Gary had been served with papers charging them with fraud, forgery, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit theft. I was in my bedroom when Patricia burst through the front door, lawsuit documents clutched in her fist, her face red with a mixture of fury and panic. Dad, she screamed from downstairs. Get down here right now. I took my time walking down the stairs, each step measured and deliberate. When I reached the living room, she was standing there with Gary beside her, both looking like they'd seen a ghost. The papers were scattered across the coffee table between us. What is this? Patricia demanded, waving the summons at me. You're suing us, your own family? I'm protecting what's mine, I said calmly, settling into the armchair across from them, what you stole from me. Gary stepped forward, his face twisted with anger. You crazy old man, we didn't steal anything. You gave us that money freely. This is how you repay our kindness. We gave you a home when you had nowhere else to go. Then why are you so worried? I asked. If everything was legal and honest, you've got nothing to fear from a judge, right? That's when Patricia really lost it. Started crying, saying I was ungrateful. that they'd done everything they could to make me comfortable, how I was repaying their generosity with this lawsuit. How could I do this to my own daughter? But I'd heard the recordings. I knew exactly what they really thought of me. The legal process took 8 months. 8 months of cold silence in that house, of them trying different tactics to get me to drop the suit. First came the intimidation, Gary threatening to kick me out, Patricia saying I'd never see my grandchildren if I didn't stop this nonsense. Then came the guilt trips, how I was destroying the family, how Martha would be ashamed of what I was doing. When that didn't work, they tried bribing me, offered to let me keep the workshop if I dropped the lawsuit, then offered me $25,000 to walk away and forget the whole thing. Finally, their lawyer tried negotiating a settlement. They'd pay me $40,000, and I'd sign a document promising never to claim any rights to the property. Carl and I turned down every offer. We had the evidence, we had the law on our side, and I wanted my day in court. Their lawyer, Howard Martinez, was everything Carl had warned me about: expensive suit, fancy office downtown, the kind of guy who thinks blue-collar workers are too stupid to understand legal strategy. During depositions, he tried to paint me as a senile old man who was confused about what he'd signed, a bitter father trying to extort money from his successful daughter. What he didn't count on was how well I'd prepared for this fight. The day of the trial, I wore my best suit, the navy blue one Martha had bought me for Patricia's wedding. Carl and I arrived early, set up our materials methodically like we were preparing a job site. Evidence folders arranged in order, exhibits labeled and ready. Witness statements organized by topic. Patricia and Gary arrived with their full legal team. Martinez, 2 associates, and what looked like a private investigator. All of them dressed like they were heading to a corporate boardroom, trying to intimidate us with their professional appearance. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lighting that reminded me of a government office. About 30 seats for observers, most of them empty except for a few court reporters and law students taking notes. When the judge entered, a woman about 50 named Judge Rebecca Foster, everyone stood. She had gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and the no-nonsense expression of someone who'd heard every excuse and sob story in the book. Carl presented our case methodically, started with the financial evidence, my $75,000 contribution, the deed showing I wasn't listed as an owner, the forged documents waiving my rights. Then he played the recordings, Patricia's own voice explaining how easy it was to fool me, discussing their plans to sell the house and put me in a nursing home. The forged signature evidence was devastating. Dorothy Williams, the handwriting expert, displayed enlarged photos of my real signatures compared to the forgeries. The differences were obvious once you knew what to look for: pressure points, letter formations, the natural flow of authentic handwriting versus the careful, deliberate strokes of someone copying. But the most damaging evidence was the video. Clear footage of Patricia practicing my signature, of both of them counting cash and discussing how to split the profits from selling my house. Gary talking about Dad's imaginary share like my life savings was some kind of joke. When it was Patricia's turn to testify, Martinez tried to control the narrative, made her sound like a devoted daughter trying to help her aging father manage his finances. But Carl's cross-examination destroyed that fiction. Miss Pierce, in your text message to Jennifer on March 15th, you stated, "Dad's so easy to fool. He signs whatever I put in front of him. Can you explain what you meant by that?" Patricia's carefully composed expression cracked. She looked to Martinez for help, but there was nothing he could do. The evidence spoke for itself. I was frustrated, she said finally. Dad was being difficult about some paperwork, and I was venting to a friend. Difficult how? Carl pressed. By asking to read documents before signing them? I don't remember the specific circumstances. Carl played the recording of her explaining the power of attorney document to me, clearly lying about what it contained. Then he showed the video of her practicing my signature. By the time he finished, Patricia was crying, but they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of someone who'd been caught red-handed. Judge Foster's ruling was swift and decisive. She'd seen enough elder fraud cases to recognize a clear-cut example when it was presented to her. The evidence shows a deliberate conspiracy to defraud Mr. Pierce of his financial contribution to this property, she said, looking directly at Patricia and Gary. The forged documents, the false representations, and the defendant's own recorded statements prove intent to deprive the plaintiff of his rightful ownership interest. She ordered them to either add my name to the deed as a 50% owner or pay me $95,000, my original $75,000 in damages and interest. She also ordered them to pay my legal fees and imposed an additional $10,000 fine for elder abuse. The gavel came down like a carpenter's hammer driving a nail home, final and decisive. Patricia and Gary chose to pay rather than share ownership. They had to take out a second mortgage, sell Gary's expensive car, and empty their savings accounts to come up with the money. Within 30 days, I had a certified check for $95,000. That afternoon, I found my own place. A small house on the other side of town with a 2-car garage that I converted into the workshop of my dreams. Better lighting than the old space, more room for my table saw, and enough space to take on custom carpentry projects for neighbors who appreciated quality work. The day I moved out, Patricia and Gary didn't say goodbye. No final words, no reconciliation attempt, just silence. I loaded my tools into a rented truck, taking special care with my father's old toolbox, and drove away from that house for the last time. 6 months later, Patricia called. Her marriage to Gary had fallen apart, she said. He blamed her for losing their financial security. She was sorry, she claimed. She'd made mistakes and needed her father back in her life. I understand you're going through a difficult time, I told her. But understanding and forgetting are two different things. You made your choices, Patty. Now you have to live with them. I hung up and went back to my workshop. Had a custom entertainment center to finish for the Johnsons down the street, and I was already behind schedule. These days, my phone rings regularly with small carpentry jobs. Word gets around when you do quality work at fair prices. My workshop smells like sawdust and wood stain, exactly the way it should. The pegboard walls are organized perfectly, every tool in its proper place. I'm 62 years old, I live alone, and I built this life with my own hands. That's enough for me, more than enough. When people ask if I regret fighting back, if I wish I'd tried harder to preserve the relationship with my daughter, I tell them what Martha used to say. Arthur, respect isn't something people owe you because you're family. It's something you earn by showing you won't let anyone walk all over you. She was right about that, just like she was right about most things. And every morning when I walk into my workshop and turn on those lights, I remember another thing she used to tell me. You're too good a man to let people take advantage of you. Took me 62 years to really understand what she meant, but I understand it now. Sometimes the biggest victory isn't getting your money back, it's proving to yourself that you're still strong enough to fight for what's right, even when the people who should love you most are the ones trying to tear you down. I learned that family isn't about blood or promises, it's about respect and trust. And when those are gone, sometimes walking away with your dignity intact is the only victory that really matters.